who gave everything to his family. I worked every day, saved every dollar, and made sure they never went hungry or cold. I thought when I grew old, they'd care for me the same way I cared for them. But I was wrong. On Christmas Eve, the people I called my own drove me to a shelter and left me there like trash. I thought my life was over that night, until one small thing in my pocket changed everything. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is, and please subscribe so more people hear my story. It was cold that night, the kind of cold that burns when you breathe. My son said they were taking me somewhere safe. I believed him. I thought maybe they had planned a small surprise, maybe dinner, maybe church service. But the car didn't stop near town or anywhere familiar. It stopped in front of a brick building with flickering lights and a sign that said, "Community Shelter." He didn't look at me when I asked what we were doing there. He just pointed at the door. I sat there confused, holding my small bag, waiting for him to say something that made sense. But nothing came. He just said they couldn't manage me anymore. Then he opened the trunk, pulled out my old coat, and tossed it in my lap. The air felt heavy. I stepped out of the car slowly, thinking maybe this was temporary. But before I could even turn around, the car door slammed and the headlights faded into the dark. I stood there alone, my breath fogging in front of me, the cold wind cutting through my thin jacket. A man at the door of the shelter looked at me, nodded, and handed me a clipboard to sign in. No words, just routine. I wrote my name with shaking hands, trying not to cry in front of strangers. I had never imagined that after decades of working, after paying bills, mortgages, and hospital fees, my last stop in life would be here, dumped like an unwanted package. Inside, the air smelled like soup and cleaning chemicals. People were lying on cots, wrapped in thin blankets. Some were talking quietly, others were already asleep. I found an empty cot near the wall and sat down. My hands were stiff from the cold, and I could still feel the vibration of the car engine that brought me there. I wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding, that maybe they'd come back in the morning. But deep down, I knew they wouldn't. Families don't drop you off on Christmas Eve by mistake. As I lay there that night, I thought about all the years I spent raising them. The early mornings, the double shifts, the Christmas mornings when I stayed up wrapping gifts so they'd wake up smiling. I had given everything I had, time, money, love, without asking for anything in return. And this was how they thanked me. They said there was no room in the house I built with my own hands, the house I paid for, the house where I once carried them to bed when they were too tired to walk. Outside, I could hear carolers singing in the distance. The sound was soft, almost mocking. I remembered when we used to sing like that together. My wife, before she passed, loved Christmas more than anything. She would have been ashamed to see what her children had become. I turned over on the cot and tried to sleep, but the cold metal frame pressed against my back. I stared at the ceiling, counting the cracks, trying to keep my heart from breaking completely. One of the volunteers walked by and handed me a small cup of coffee. It was lukewarm, but it felt like the kindest thing anyone had done for me all week. I nodded in thanks. I didn't speak. Words felt too small for the kind of hurt I carried. Around me, people snored, coughed, whispered in their sleep. Some prayed quietly. I didn't pray. Not that night. I just closed my eyes and promised myself one thing: that if I ever got out of that shelter, I would never depend on anyone again. Not a son. Not a relative. No one. I would find a way to stand again, even if it took every last bit of strength left in me. I didn't know how, but I knew one thing for sure. Life wasn't done with me yet. The first thing I felt that morning wasn't cold. It was shame, the kind that sits heavy in your chest and doesn't move. When I opened my eyes, the shelter lights were still dim and breakfast was being served. Paper plates, watery oatmeal, burnt coffee. People lined up quietly, heads down. I joined the line, trying to blend in, but I could feel eyes on me. Some were curious, others just tired. It didn't matter. I didn't belong there, and they could tell. I used to walk into restaurants where people greeted me with respect. Now I stood in a charity line, waiting for a meal like a beggar. I sat down with my tray and stared at the food. My hands trembled. I wasn't hungry, but I forced myself to eat. Pride doesn't fill an empty stomach. Across the room, an old man was talking to himself, mumbling about how his children forgot him too. A woman wiped her eyes quietly while reading a worn-out photo in her hand. I realized I wasn't the only one who'd been thrown away by family. The world outside pretends to care about kindness, but here, in this room, you see the truth. People only love you when you're useful. My coat was thin, the same one I wore for years. The zipper was broken, the pockets torn. I could still smell the faint scent of my house on it. The wood polish, the detergent, the warmth of a place that wasn't mine anymore. I rubbed my hands together to stay warm, but it didn't help. I wanted to go outside, but I didn't know where to go. The shelter had a rule. You could leave, but you couldn't come back after dark unless you signed up again. I had nowhere else to be, so I stayed. When I looked out the window, snow was falling. I could picture my family inside my house, my son sitting near the fireplace, his wife smiling, the tree lit up in the corner. They were probably opening gifts, eating dinner, pretending I never existed. Maybe they were telling people I was staying somewhere comfortable. People like them always lie to make themselves look clean. They didn't say they dumped me here because I was too slow or too much work. They didn't say they left me on Christmas Eve with nothing but a small bag and old shoes. Later that day, a group of volunteers came in, handing out donated coats and socks. One of them smiled at me and asked if I needed anything. I wanted to say, a home, but I just nodded and took what she gave me. The coat was 2 sizes too big, but it was warm. That small act of kindness felt bigger than anything my own family had done in years. I realized strangers had more humanity than the people I raised. I went back to my cot after dinner. The noise in the room grew louder, people laughing, some playing cards, others just talking about life. I didn't join them. I couldn't. I lay there, staring at the ceiling again, listening to the echoes of other people's pain. My life had fallen apart in less than 24 hours. One day I was sitting at home, planning what gifts to buy for my grandkids, and the next I was here, invisible. That's how fast love can disappear when it's built on convenience. Before I tried to sleep, I reached into my pocket and felt the crumpled lottery ticket I'd bought earlier that week. I had forgotten all about it. It was a quick pick, a habit I kept for years, not because I believed in luck, but because it gave me a small moment of hope. I held it in my hand that night, staring at the numbers. It was just a piece of paper then, something worthless. But it was mine. The only thing I still owned that hadn't been taken from me. I slipped it back into my pocket, closed my eyes, and whispered to myself that maybe, just maybe, something would change. That night the pain started in my chest. It wasn't sharp, just heavy, like something pressing down, refusing to move. I couldn't tell if it was my heart or the weight of what they did to me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces, my son, his wife, my grandkids, all smiling as they drove away. I tried to tell myself maybe they'd come back, maybe they'd realize what they did. But morning came, and no one showed. Just another cold sunrise through dirty shelter windows. I sat up slowly, clutching my coat tighter around me. My hands were swollen from the cold. The coffee they served was thin and bitter, but I drank it anyway. I kept thinking about Christmas mornings from years ago. The smell of pancakes, the sound of wrapping paper, the laughter that used to fill my house. My house. Now they had it. Decorated, warm, full of lights. They probably sat around the same table where I once carved the turkey. I built that home with my bare hands, and now it was filled with people who couldn't even give me a bed for one night. The other men in the shelter started talking about their families. One said his daughter stopped calling after she got married. Another said his sons only visit when they want money. I realized I wasn't alone in this kind of pain. There's a special kind of heartbreak that comes from your own blood turning cold. It doesn't kill you fast. It just drains you, piece by piece. I didn't talk much. I just listened. Everyone had their story, but the ending was always the same. Forgotten parents, broken promises, empty homes. When the snow stopped falling, I went outside to breathe. The sky was gray, the ground wet, but it felt better than being indoors. I walked a few blocks, slowly, because my knees were stiff. The streets were quiet. Stores were closed. Everyone was home, celebrating. I passed a bakery where I used to buy cakes for my kids. I stood outside, staring at the display, remembering the times I'd surprised them with treats after work. I could almost hear their little voices, their laughter. That memory should have warmed me. Instead, it hurt more than anything. I sat down on a bench outside a closed shop. My chest felt tighter. I pressed my hand against it and took deep breaths. I wasn't scared of dying. I was scared of dying forgotten. The thought that no one would care if I was gone, that was harder to bear than the cold. For the first time, I wondered what all those years of hard work were for. You raise children thinking they'll carry your love forward. But sometimes, they only carry your money. When the shelter volunteer came by in a van offering rides, I climbed in. She asked if I was okay. I nodded. There was no point explaining. People feel sorry for old men in shelters, but they don't understand what betrayal feels like. It's not about being poor. It's about being erased by the people you built your life around. Back inside, I lay on my cot and looked at the ceiling again. I felt that small piece of paper in my pocket, the lottery ticket. I took it out, unfolded it, and stared at the numbers. It almost made me laugh. The irony of it. A broke old man holding a piece of paper that promised something better, something impossible. I didn't believe in luck anymore, but I still kept it close. Maybe not for hope, but for memory. It reminded me that even the smallest things can change when you least expect it. I closed my eyes that night thinking about one thing. I might have lost everything, but I wasn't dead yet. Tomorrow could still surprise me. That small piece of paper in my pocket became the only thing I had left that belonged to me. I'd bought it 2 days before Christmas when I was still at home. My son had sent me to the corner store to pick up groceries. I had a few dollars left after paying for what he asked, and without thinking, I bought one lottery ticket. Just one. It wasn't a plan or a dream. It was habit. Every week for years, I'd buy one ticket, scratch it, and throw it away. Never won more than a few dollars. But this time, for some reason, I didn't toss it out. I folded it carefully and slipped it into my coat pocket. I forgot about it completely until that night in the shelter. When I reached into my pocket and felt the thin paper, it felt like a piece of my old life. Something small. Something mine. I pulled it out, looked at the numbers, and smiled bitterly. The ink was slightly smudged from my wet gloves. I almost threw it away right then, but something stopped me. Maybe pride, maybe stubbornness. Maybe it was just that I had nothing else left to lose. I slid it back into my pocket and told myself I'd check it in the morning. The other men around me were talking about getting back on their feet after the holidays. Some were waiting for jobs to reopen, others hoping for family to call. I didn't join in. I'd already accepted that my family wouldn't be calling, not tomorrow, not ever. But that little ticket burned in my hand all night. It wasn't about the money. It was about what it represented. A chance, however small, that my story wasn't finished yet. When the shelter lights went out, I lay awake staring into the dark. The sound of wind outside mixed with the quiet snoring of the men around me. I thought about the life I used to have. The noise, the laughter, the arguments, the smell of dinner cooking. Now, all I had was silence and one piece of paper that probably meant nothing. But still, I couldn't throw it away. I held it in my palm like it was something alive. Early the next morning, before anyone else was up, I sat by the old television in the dining hall. It was a small screen, flickering with static, tuned to the morning news. The air smelled like burnt coffee and bleach. I didn't expect anything. I just wanted to distract myself. I unfolded the ticket again and looked at the numbers. 4, 12, 19, 27, 33, and 48. I whispered them in my head a few times, like a prayer I didn't believe in. Then I waited for the announcer to read the winning numbers. As I sat there, I thought about the irony of it all. Me sitting in a shelter, holding a worthless ticket, while my family sat in my warm house. They probably didn't even remember I existed. I rubbed my hands together to warm them and stared at the screen. The news anchors were smiling, cheerful, talking about holiday winners and miracles. It all sounded fake, like a joke that wasn't funny. But when the lottery segment came on, my heart skipped a beat. They started reading the numbers, one by one: 4, 12, 19, 27, 33, 48. I blinked. I looked at my ticket again. Every number matched, every single one. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. I looked again, carefully, shaking so hard the paper nearly tore. Still matched. I stood there frozen, staring at the screen. The ticket I almost threw away. The ticket I bought with my last few dollars. The one I forgot in my coat pocket. It was worth $5 million, but I didn't jump. I didn't scream. I just sat back down slowly and laughed under my breath. Not out of joy, out of disbelief, out of the simple, quiet realization that fate has a strange way of paying people back. When I woke up that Christmas morning, I didn't expect anything different. The same smell of coffee, the same noise of footsteps, the same tired faces waiting for breakfast. But the small TV in the shelter dining hall was already on, showing the morning news. I sat down at one of the plastic tables, holding my crumpled lottery ticket. My hands were shaking from the cold. I unfolded the paper slowly, trying to smooth out the wrinkles. I didn't think it was worth much. Probably another lost ticket like all the rest. Still, I looked at it one more time before tossing it. The screen flashed bright colors and cheerful voices. The news anchors were smiling, talking about Christmas miracles and good fortune. Then the lottery segment came up. I almost looked away, but when they started reading the winning numbers, something in me froze. One by one, each number matched mine. 4, 12, 19, 27, 33, 48. My heart started pounding so loud I could barely hear the rest. I checked again, then again. Every single number matched. I blinked hard, thinking it was some kind of mistake. I rubbed my eyes, leaned closer to the screen, and held the ticket inches from my face. But it was real. The announcer said it again. The jackpot was $5 million. The shelter went quiet when I stood up suddenly, clutching the ticket in both hands. A few people turned to look. I couldn't speak. I couldn't even breathe. I just stared at the TV while the world blurred around me. A volunteer came over and asked if I was okay. I nodded, but tears started falling before I even realized. Not from sadness, from disbelief. I had nothing. Not a family, not a home, not even a proper pair of shoes. And now, suddenly, I had $5 million in my coat pocket. It didn't feel real. It felt like some kind of strange punishment or reward. I couldn't tell which. The shelter staff helped me call the lottery office. I verified the numbers step by step, still expecting someone to say there had been a mistake. But every check came back clear. I was the only winner. They told me to come down to the local station for verification. The staff at the shelter started cheering. Some clapped. One man patted my shoulder and said I was the Christmas miracle that year. I didn't know what to say. When I left the shelter that morning, cameras were already outside. Reporters had shown up fast. Word spread quickly when a man who was dropped off at a homeless shelter on Christmas Eve became a millionaire the next morning. They wanted pictures, stories, reactions. I didn't have fancy clothes or clean shoes. I still wore the same coat my family had left me in. But I walked into that lottery office standing tall. I didn't need a suit. The truth was enough. When the reporter asked how I felt, I didn't talk about luck. I talked about being left behind. I told them that I was dropped off at a shelter less than 12 hours before finding out I was the winner. The room went silent for a moment. They recorded everything: my face, my name, my story. And by the time I left that building, the world knew exactly who I was. I didn't smile much that day. People expected me to be excited, to jump and celebrate. But I wasn't thinking about money. I was thinking about the car door that slammed in my face the night before, the faces that left me in the cold, the laughter that faded into darkness. They thought they'd gotten rid of me. But fate had other plans. The cameras followed me as I walked out of that building. Reporters shouted questions, flashes went off, and people clapped. They called me the Christmas miracle. Some even cried when they heard my story. I didn't cry. I just stood there, holding the giant check they gave me, still wearing my torn coat and broken shoes. The coat that smelled like a shelter bed. The shoes that had holes in the soles. I didn't want to change out of them. I wanted the world to see exactly what my family threw away. They asked me if I had anyone to call. I told them no. They asked if I had any message for my family. I said nothing. I didn't need to. The cameras had already said enough. My face was on every TV screen in the state by noon. My name was trending online. The man who was left in the cold was now holding $5 million. Every shot, every word, every story that aired made the truth louder. I wasn't the broken one. They were. The staff at the shelter hugged me before I left. Some were crying. The same people who had nothing were genuinely happy for me. That hit me harder than the money. Strangers showed more love in a few hours than my family had shown me in years. I took pictures with them before leaving. I promised I'd come back. And I meant it. When I walked out to the parking lot, the reporters kept asking what I'd do first. A man offered to buy me new clothes. Another offered to drive me to a hotel. I said no to both. I didn't want comfort yet. I wanted the world to see the truth, not a cleaned-up version of it. I wanted people to remember what I looked like when my own family left me behind. Because that's the real story. By the time I got to the hotel later that day, my phone, the one the shelter had given me, wouldn't stop ringing. Unknown numbers, news channels, talk shows, people offering financial advice. I turned it off. I sat on the hotel bed and watched the evening news. My picture filled the screen. The anchor said, "A local man abandoned by his family finds his miracle this Christmas." I sat there in silence, staring at the screen. Then I saw it, a live shot of my old neighborhood. My house, my family's house, the same one they threw me out of. The reporter was standing right outside the driveway. Behind her I saw them, my son, his wife, my grandkids, standing in the window. Faces pale, eyes wide, watching me on TV. The world knew now. Their neighbors knew. Their co-workers knew. The people they bragged to all year knew. Everyone knew. I imagined what they were thinking, regret, shame, maybe fear. They had thrown me away to make space in their lives, and now the man they left on the curb had become a headline. They probably couldn't leave the house without hearing whispers. I didn't feel angry anymore, just calm. Sometimes life doesn't need your help to set things right. Later that night, when the phone rang again, I let it go to voicemail. I knew who it was. I didn't need to hear their voices to know what they'd say. Apologies, excuses, lies. But I didn't need their words. The world had already spoken for me. That night, for the first time in years, I slept in a real bed. Warm sheets, quiet room, soft light. But even then, I didn't smile. I just stared at the ceiling, thinking about everything that had happened in 24 hours, from a cot in a shelter to a hotel room worth more than my old house. I realized then that revenge doesn't always come with fire or shouting. Sometimes it comes wrapped in silence and fate. By the next morning, every local station was running the story. My face was everywhere. Newspapers, television, even the front page of news sites. Elderly man abandoned by family wins $5 million lottery. They repeated it again and again. Every detail was there. My name, my age, the shelter's name, even the small town where my son lived. The camera crews had parked right outside their house. Reporters stood on the sidewalk asking neighbors what they thought. Neighbors didn't hold back. They said it was heartless, cruel, disgusting. Every person on that street now knew the truth about my family. They tried to hide at first. Curtains closed, lights off. But the news trucks didn't leave. People stopped by their front yard, taking pictures, whispering. Someone even left a sign on their fence that said, "Shame." My son's wife called the news station to say it was a misunderstanding. She said they didn't abandon me, that they just couldn't give me proper care. But it was too late. The world had already decided who was right. Every video, every photo told the truth. I was sitting in a shelter while they were celebrating Christmas at home. I sat in my hotel room, watching all of it unfold. I didn't feel proud or vengeful, just quiet. Everything they did in secret was now public. Every person they lied to could now see their faces on the screen, smiling next to the man they dumped in the cold. I didn't have to lift a finger. Karma worked faster than any plan I could have made. The phone rang all day. Producers from national shows wanted interviews. Banks wanted to help manage my money. Even people from my old job reached out to congratulate me. Everyone wanted a piece of the story, but the ones who needed to see it the most were already living the nightmare, my family. I didn't take their calls. I didn't reply to their messages. I let them sit in silence while the world judged them. By noon, photos of them started circulating online. Someone had found old pictures from social media, family vacations, dinners, smiling faces. Underneath, comments poured in. People called them ungrateful, heartless, greedy. Every post they'd made in the past became a reminder of their hypocrisy. Their perfect image was gone in a single day. The same pride that made them abandon me was now burning their reputation to the ground. I knew they'd be glued to the TV that day. I knew they couldn't escape it. Every time they changed the channel, there I was, the old man they threw out. Every time they looked at their phones, there was another article, another headline, another reminder. Their world was built on pretending to be good people, and now everyone knew better. The next morning, my son tried to talk to the reporters outside. He said he deeply regretted what happened, but the cameras didn't care about his regret. They cared about the image of a man trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. When he went to work, his boss sent him home. His company didn't want the attention. My daughter-in-law stopped going out completely. My grandkids stopped posting online. In less than 48 hours, their lives turned upside down. Not because of what I said, but because of what they did. I stayed quiet. I didn't give interviews. I didn't post anything. The silence hurt them more. They couldn't twist my words because I didn't give them any. Every headline spoke for itself. Every viewer could see what kind of people they were. For years they had painted me as the old burden. Now the world saw the truth. They weren't caretakers. They were cowards. That night, I turned off the TV and sat by the hotel window. Outside, snow was falling again, just like the night they left me. But this time, I wasn't cold. I wasn't hungry. I wasn't forgotten. The same snow that covered me outside that shelter now fell outside my window in silence, like the world was quietly erasing every trace of their cruelty. By the third day, the phone wouldn't stop ringing. Calls came from every direction. Reporters, banks, old neighbors, distant relatives, and finally, my family. At first, I ignored every number I didn't know. But then I saw it. My son's number flashing on the screen. I stared at it for a while. The same number that used to call me when he needed money, advice, or a favor. Now he was calling for something else. I let it ring until it stopped. 5 minutes later, it rang again. This time it was his wife, then my granddaughter. Over and over. I didn't answer a single one. They left voicemail after voicemail. Some were quiet, others desperate. They said they made a mistake. They said they were worried. They said they didn't mean to leave me there. Each one sounded more frantic than the last. The words didn't hurt, not anymore. I had already heard the truth when they slammed that car door. I didn't need apologies that came only after the world turned against them. They weren't sorry because they cared. They were sorry because everyone saw what they did. One message made me pause. It was my son's voice, softer than I'd ever heard it. He said the neighbors had stopped talking to them. His boss told him not to come back until things cooled off. His wife's parents were embarrassed. The kids were getting bullied online. He said he couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't step outside without cameras following him. For a brief second, I almost felt sorry for him. Then I remembered how easily he left me in that parking lot on Christmas Eve, standing alone in the snow. The same silence he gave me that night. I gave it back now. The calls kept coming through the evening. They begged me to come home, to fix this together, to tell the truth. But the truth didn't need fixing. The truth was on every screen in America. The old man they left to freeze was now a millionaire, and they were the villains of the story. I didn't make it that way. They did. I just existed long enough for the world to notice. By the fourth day, their tone changed. The begging turned to anger. I heard my son shout in one message that the money was ours, that I was making a fool of the family. He said I was turning people against them. I laughed when I heard that. He still didn't understand. I didn't have to turn anyone against them. They did that to themselves the moment they chose cruelty over compassion. When I walked through the hotel lobby that night, one of the employees stopped me. He had tears in his eyes and said, "You remind me of my father." He hugged me before I could even reply. That one hug from a stranger meant more than anything my own family ever gave me. For years, I had begged for love from people who saw me as an inconvenience. Now, I didn't have to beg. Respect came naturally once the truth came out. I turned my phone off for good after that. I didn't need to hear another word. They had their chance, years of chances, to show kindness. I had given them everything: a home, education, stability, and trust. All they had to do was stand by me when I got old. Instead, they traded me for comfort, and comfort was the first thing the world took from them. While they hid behind closed doors, I sat by the window of my suite, watching snow fall over the city lights. I wasn't celebrating. I wasn't even smiling. I was simply free. The pain that used to live inside me had finally been replaced by peace. The silence that used to feel heavy now felt like relief. I knew they'd spend the rest of their lives wishing they could undo that night. But life doesn't give you do-overs for cruelty. It gives you consequences. Their fall didn't happen overnight. It happened slow, one humiliation at a time. The story kept spreading. Every news channel, every website, every social feed. Family abandons father on Christmas Eve. He wins $5 million the next day. People couldn't stop talking about it. My son's name wasn't mentioned at first, but the internet doesn't take long to find what it wants. Within a week, his full name, address, and photos from his social media were everywhere. His coworkers saw it, his boss saw it, his clients saw it. Everyone knew. He stopped going to work completely after that. The company released a statement saying they didn't support his behavior. They didn't fire him officially. They just stopped giving him shifts until he quit on his own. His wife tried to do damage control online. She wrote long posts about how the media twisted the story and how they didn't mean harm. But no one believed her. People replied with screenshots of my interview. They pointed out the dates, the photos, the police record showing that she and my son had dropped me off at the shelter. The more she defended herself, the worse it got. Eventually, she deleted every account they had, but the screenshots never disappeared. The internet never forgets. Then came the neighbors. They stopped waving. Some crossed the street when they saw them. Their kids stopped playing with my grandkids. Everyone knew them as that family. The shame didn't fade. It grew louder every time they stepped outside. Even the local paper ran a headline calling it a lesson in karma. My son couldn't handle it. He started drinking. His wife left to stay with her parents for a while. The house that was once full of laughter turned into silence. Bills piled up. With no job and no savings, they started selling things: furniture, jewelry, the second car. Each week, something else disappeared from that house. I knew because reporters kept sending me updates. They asked if I wanted to comment. I never did. There was nothing left to say. Every action they took was just another consequence of what they'd done. Eventually, the house went up for sale. The same house they threw me out of. The one I built with my hands, brick by brick. They tried to hide it by saying they were downsizing. But everyone knew the truth. No one wanted to buy it either. People said it felt bad. They said it was cursed. Maybe it was. Maybe the curse wasn't the house. Maybe it was the greed that lived inside it. By spring, they were living in a small apartment across town. No more big dinners, no more guests. My son picked up part-time work at a hardware store. His wife got a job cleaning offices. It wasn't the money that broke them. It was the loss of respect. People stopped trusting them. Even their own relatives avoided them. They couldn't erase what they'd done because it was everywhere. Every Christmas, their names popped back up in news reruns. Every year, the same reminder. I didn't visit them. I didn't send messages. I didn't have to. The world had done everything for me. There's a strange kind of justice that comes without words, when the truth becomes too heavy for lies to carry. They had laughed when they left me in that parking lot, thinking I'd fade away quietly. Instead, they became the ones people whispered about. One reporter told me they were trying to move on, maybe even leave town. But I knew better. You can't outrun guilt. You can change your address, but not your name. Wherever they went, the story would follow. They didn't lose money. They lost dignity. They didn't lose comfort. They lost peace. And every time they saw another story about me helping shelters, donating food, building homes for people with nowhere to go, they had to live with the truth that the man they left behind rose higher than they ever did. Their punishment wasn't poverty. It was watching me rebuild the life they destroyed. When the noise finally faded, peace came quietly. No cameras, no interviews, no reporters, just quiet mornings and long walks by the coast. I bought a small house overlooking the water. Nothing fancy, just clean and warm. The kind of place where silence feels safe instead of lonely. The air smelled like salt. The waves hit the rocks steady and slow, and every morning I'd sit on the porch with coffee, thinking about how life turned out. I wasn't angry anymore. The anger had burned away long before the money came. What was left was something stronger. Clarity. I learned that peace doesn't come from winning, it comes from letting go. I didn't buy cars or jewelry. I didn't chase headlines or show off. I spent my money on things that mattered. The first thing I did was go back to the shelter. I didn't tell them who I was at first. I just walked in, sat down, and listened. Some of the same people were still there. Men who'd been forgotten by their families, women still fighting to survive. I knew their pain. I had lived it. When they realized who I was, some cried, some smiled, some just shook my hand. I made sure they all got new beds, warm meals, and clean clothes. I paid for the shelter's heating for the whole winter. That place gave me a roof when no one else would, and I wanted it to stand forever. After that, I started a small fund for seniors who had nowhere to go. Quietly. No big announcements, no cameras, no speeches. I just made sure no one would ever have to feel the cold the way I did that Christmas Eve. I helped build ramps for wheelchairs, fixed roofs, and paid hospital bills for strangers. It didn't make me a hero. It just made me human again. Helping others gave me back the piece of myself my family tried to take. Sometimes I'd see my name pop up on the news again. Small stories about donations, good deeds. My family must have seen them too. Maybe they watched from that tiny apartment they ended up in. Maybe they turned off the TV when my face appeared. I didn't care. I didn't need revenge anymore. They had already been punished by their own actions. I forgave them quietly, not because they asked, but because I needed to move on. Holding hate keeps you stuck in the same place as the people who hurt you. Letting go is what sets you free. I never called them again. Never visited. I didn't need to see regret in their eyes to know it was there. Regret doesn't hide well. It shows up in the silence that follows a cruel act. I knew they'd think about me every Christmas. I knew they'd remember that night and what they lost because of it. That was enough. Now, when December comes, I hang a single wreath on my door. I cook a small dinner for myself, simple food, nothing fancy. I sit by the fire and watch the lights flicker against the wall. And I smile, not because I'm rich, but because I survived. I made it through the kind of pain that could have destroyed me, and I came out stronger than ever. Every year, I send a large donation to shelters across the state. But I never sign it with my family's name. I sign it with mine. The name they tried to forget. The name the world will now always remember. Final thought. They left me in the cold on Christmas Eve, thinking I'd disappear. The next morning, they saw my face on every TV in America, not as a burden, but as the man who made fate his ally. They threw me away like I was nothing. Life proved I was everything they weren't. This is my true story. I built a house with my bare hands so my son could live better than I ever did. I worked every day, every night, paid every bill, and gave him everything he ever asked for. When I got old, I thought I'd rest in peace under that same roof. But instead, he kicked me out and gave my room to his in-laws. I slept in the shed while they laughed inside my house. I didn't fight back. I just signed one paper the next morning, and it changed everything. Before I tell you, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And subscribe so my story can reach more people. I started building that house when I was 24. Back then, I didn't have much, just a shovel, a small piece of land, and the will to make something that would last longer than me. Every brick was paid for with overtime shifts and busted hands. I worked in the heat, in the rain, sometimes until midnight. I poured the foundation myself, laid every tile, wired the lights, and built the porch plank by plank. That house wasn't just wood and concrete. It was my entire life's work. I raised my son inside those walls. He learned to walk on those floors. Every corner had a memory. His first birthday, his school photos on the living room wall, his mother's laughter echoing through the hall before cancer took her. After she died, that house became the only thing that kept me together. I promised myself I'd keep it standing no matter what. I never bought fancy things, never wasted money. Every dollar went into that property. New roof, new wiring, better plumbing. I made sure it was perfect, so when I got old, I wouldn't have to depend on anyone. I thought it would be my safe place. I thought I'd die in that same bedroom I shared with my wife, and my son would take care of me the way I took care of him. But time has a way of showing you the truth about people. When he got married, things started changing, slowly at first. He stopped calling me dad and started saying old man like it was a joke. I laughed it off because I thought maybe that's just how kids talk these days. But jokes stop being funny when they start sounding real. He moved his wife in, and I gave them space. I didn't complain. I handed him the keys, told him to take responsibility. I thought I was passing down something meaningful. Instead, I handed over my peace. The laughter in the house wasn't the same anymore. It wasn't warm. It was loud, sharp, and never included me. They had friends over almost every weekend. I stayed in my room, out of the way, just listening. I kept the bills paid, the lawn cut, and the taxes up to date. Everything was still under my name. I never missed a payment in 40 years. Sometimes I'd walk past their room and hear them whispering about money. I'd hear my name mixed into their sentences, but I never said anything. I knew where it was heading. I've seen enough life to know when people start looking at you not as family, but as a wallet. I didn't want to believe it, but it was happening right under my roof. When my son's in-laws started visiting, I was polite. I cooked for them, gave them my seat at the table, even told them to make themselves at home. I thought that's what good families do. But soon, they came more often, stayed longer, acted more comfortable than they should. It didn't bother me at first, until one day it did. The signs were all there, but I didn't see them because I was still holding on to hope that blood meant something. That house stood for everything I believed in: work, loyalty, and family. But I didn't know it would become the same place where I'd learn betrayal the hard way. I used to walk around and run my hand across the walls, proud of what I built. Now those same walls heard the beginning of my humiliation. I didn't say a word. I kept fixing leaks, painting walls, cleaning gutters. I thought maybe things would change, maybe they'd realize what that house really meant. But they didn't. To them, it was just property. To me, it was my life. And soon, they were about to take it. One room, one insult, one signature at a time. It started small. My son stopped helping around the house. The same boy who once ran to grab my tools now sat on the couch with his phone while I fixed his sink. He used to thank me for everything. Then one day, he just stopped. Gratitude turned into expectation. Expectation turned into orders. He'd leave lights on, pile up bills, and tell me he was handling things. But nothing was ever handled. I still paid for everything: the property tax, the insurance, even the groceries. I was still keeping that house running while he acted like it was his. Then came the tone. The way he spoke to me changed. No more dad. Just old man, you, or silence. His wife followed his lead. She'd roll her eyes when I walked into a room, whisper something under her breath, and smile when he laughed. The respect was gone, replaced by something worse: pity. They treated me like I was just waiting to die so they could take over. I could feel it every day. It was in the way they talked about money, in the way they avoided looking me in the eye. After his wife's parents started visiting more often, things got worse. They acted like they owned the place. They parked in my driveway, used my chairs, drank my coffee, and left their mess for me to clean. My son didn't say a word to stop them. He looked proud, like having them there made him more important. I stayed quiet, watched from the porch, and told myself it wasn't worth the fight. I thought maybe this was just a rough patch, that one day he'd remember who built everything he was standing on. But greed doesn't stop by itself. Once people taste it, it becomes hunger. It became clear when they started talking about the future of the house. My son said it was time to update ownership, that things needed to be simplified. I didn't argue. I let him talk. I knew what he was really saying. He wanted the house in his name, the same house I built brick by brick, the same house I never once asked him to pay for. I sat there and nodded, pretending to agree, because I wanted to see how far he'd go. Then one day, he said something that hit harder than any insult. He said, "Dad, you should relax. You don't have to worry about these things anymore." That was the moment I understood. He didn't see me as part of his family. He saw me as a problem to manage. He wanted my silence, not my presence. He wanted the house, not the man who built it. I noticed his wife's parents bringing boxes one weekend. They didn't leave that time. They unpacked. My son carried in their suitcases like he was doing them a favor. They laughed, drank wine, and celebrated while I sat outside, trying to figure out what was happening. When I came back in, my room door was open, and strangers were setting their clothes in my closet. That's when it stopped being disrespect. That's when it became war. They had no shame, no hesitation, no gratitude. My son avoided looking at me as I stood there. He just said, "You can use the small room by the hallway." That's when I understood what kind of man he had become. A man who valued comfort over blood. But I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene. I just nodded and moved my things quietly. They thought I was weak. They thought they'd won. But they forgot one thing. Every nail in that house, every paper in the drawer, every line on the deed still carried my name. I didn't say a word. I went to bed that night in a small room and made a promise to myself. I wouldn't fight them with noise. I'd fight them with ink. It was a Saturday afternoon when it finally happened. I came home from the grocery store carrying 2 small bags of food. Nothing fancy, just bread, milk, and a few cans. I walked into the house and heard laughter from upstairs. It wasn't the kind of laughter that made a house feel warm. It was the kind that made your stomach turn. When I reached my bedroom door, I froze. My bed was gone. The closet was open. 2 strangers, my son's in-laws, were standing there unpacking their clothes into my wardrobe. My old photographs were stacked on the floor like junk. My chair, the one I used to sit on every evening, was gone. They didn't even stop what they were doing. They smiled like they belonged there. My son stood behind them, arms crossed, pretending to look busy on his phone. He didn't say anything for a while. He just pointed down the hallway, toward the small storage room near the laundry. That's when I realized what he meant. That was where I was supposed to stay now. In a box-sized room with no window, no fan, no space for anything but a bed. The room I built with my own hands was now a guest room for people who didn't even live there. I didn't argue. I didn't ask questions. I walked down the hallway, opened the door to that tiny room, and looked around. It smelled like dust and detergent. There was barely enough space for me to turn around, but that was where they wanted me. Out of sight. The same house I built had no room for me anymore. My son didn't help me move my things. I carried my few clothes myself. Each trip down that hallway felt heavier than the one before. By the time I finished, my back hurt, but I didn't say a word. I sat on the edge of that small bed and looked at the ceiling, thinking about how a man can work his whole life only to be treated like he doesn't exist. That night, I heard them laughing again. The sound came from my old room. They were drinking, celebrating, watching TV. The door slammed once, then again. Every sound reminded me that I was no longer part of that home. I was a stranger living under the same roof I built. I couldn't sleep, My hands shook, not from age, but from anger I couldn't show. I thought about every nail I hammered, every paycheck I spent to keep that place standing. All of it turned against me. The next morning, my son's wife called me for breakfast, but the seat I used to sit in was already taken by her father. My cup was gone. My plate was gone. I ate standing at the counter while they talked about vacations and bills, acting like I wasn't there. They didn't even look my way. The man sitting in my chair had the nerve to call the house beautiful. I looked around at the faces that once called me Dad and saw nothing but selfishness. I knew I had no place there anymore. I started spending more time outside, just walking. I didn't go far. I'd sit on a bench across the street and watch the house. People passing by probably thought I was just some old man with nowhere to go. They weren't wrong, at least not yet. But I had something they didn't know about. The deed, the documents, the ownership that never changed. That night, while everyone was asleep, I went to my desk and opened the bottom drawer. Inside was a folder with every legal paper related to the house, the title, the taxes, the insurance. Every one of them still under my name. I held it in my hands and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Control. They might have taken my room, but they hadn't taken my power. I went to bed in that small room knowing one thing. The next time someone moved out of that house, it wouldn't be me. The nights after that were the hardest I've lived through in that house. I'd lie on that narrow bed and stare at the ceiling while they laughed in my room. The room that used to be mine. They watched movies late, slammed doors, and played music like they were celebrating something. Every sound was a reminder that I didn't belong there anymore. Sometimes the smell of food would drift through the hallway, rich and warm, while I sat in silence eating leftovers cold from the fridge. They never asked if I'd eaten. They never offered me a plate. The same man who used to feed them when they visited now ate what they left behind. They started treating me like a tenant who overstayed his welcome. They complained that I walked too loud, that I left lights on, that my cough disturbed their sleep. My son didn't say a word to stop them. He just watched. I used to think raising a child meant teaching him kindness. But I learned that no matter what you teach, greed can erase it faster than time can teach respect. Each morning, I'd wake up early to clean the porch and make coffee, the same way I always did. My son and his in-laws would come down, take their cups, and talk about me like I wasn't standing right there. They said things like, "He's getting forgetful," or, "Maybe it's time he moved somewhere smaller." They were already planning where to send me next, out of my own house. I'd stand there quietly, nodding, pretending not to hear. But I heard everything. I heard their plans, their laughter, their small jokes that weren't jokes at all. The woman who married my son started treating the house like it was hers. She replaced my curtains, moved my old photos into storage, and bought new furniture without asking. Her parents sat in my living room every evening, watching TV, feet on my table. I used to sit there after long days of work, proud of what I built. Now, I couldn't even look at that room without feeling sick. The more they took, the quieter I became. Silence became my only weapon, not anger, not words. Silence. Because when people think you've given up, they stop paying attention. And when they stop paying attention, that's when you make your move. One night, I woke up around midnight because of the noise. They were throwing a party. Loud music, laughter, clinking glasses. My son's wife's parents were drinking and singing in the same room where my wife once took her last breath. I walked to the kitchen for some water, and one of them shouted that I should get some sleep. I didn't respond. I just turned around and went back to that small, dusty room. I sat there for hours, not angry anymore, just done. I knew I couldn't fix them. I couldn't make them understand what family means. The only thing I could do was take back what I built and make sure they never got to destroy it again. From that night on, I started preparing. I checked every drawer, every document, every account. The house was fully in my name. The insurance, too. Even the land title hadn't been updated since the day I bought it. They thought because I was old, I was blind. But I knew exactly where everything was and how to use it. I made copies of every paper, hid them in a safe spot, and waited. Each day after that was just patience. I let them dig their own hole deeper with every insult, every act of disrespect. I didn't need revenge yet. I just needed the right moment. They thought they broke me by taking my room. They didn't know they were giving me time to build my plan. It happened a week later. My son came into the kitchen one morning with a folder in his hand. He set it down on the table like he was doing something important. He said there were tax papers that needed my signature. He claimed it was just an update to the property records so the bills could be handled more easily. His wife stood behind him, watching. Her parents sat at the dining table, pretending to drink coffee, but I could tell they were waiting for something. I looked at the folder, then at all of them, and I understood exactly what this was. It wasn't paperwork for taxes. It was a trap. Inside that folder were transfer papers. One line in the middle, small font, legal phrasing, would move ownership of the house into my son's name permanently. They thought I wouldn't notice. They thought I'd just sign without reading because that's what old men do. I didn't say anything. I just nodded and said I'd look over it later. He smiled, thinking it was done. He didn't know I'd spent the night before going through my own documents, checking every title, every clause, every rule about ownership transfer. I knew the law better than he thought I did. That night, I sat in my small room reading those papers under a desk lamp. Every word was designed to trick me. Polite, legal, and full of hidden meaning. I found the line that mattered most, the one that would hand everything to him. I took a pen and circled it. Then I laughed quietly to myself. They thought they were smart. They forgot who taught them how to sign a lease, how to pay taxes, how to run a household. I wasn't the fool in this story. I was the man who built everything they were trying to steal. The next morning, I took that same folder, left the house early, and went straight to my lawyer's office. He'd helped me buy the house 40 years ago. When I walked in, he looked surprised to see me, but smiled when I handed him the papers. He read them once and shook his head. "They almost got you," he said. "Almost. But not this time." I told him what was happening, every detail, how they moved me out, how they were trying to take over. He didn't say much. He just took out a new set of documents and started typing. Together, we rewrote everything: the deed, the ownership transfer conditions, and the power of attorney. By the time we finished, every line of that property's legal standing had changed. It was all in my name again. No one could alter it without my consent. He also added a clause to my will. If anyone tried to force or deceive me into signing anything, they would lose all rights to inheritance or assets. Everything would go to charity instead. I left his office that day feeling lighter than I had in years. When I returned home, the same folder was still sitting on the table. My son asked if I had signed it yet. I said I would in the morning. He smiled again, confident, sure of himself. I nodded and went to my room. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in months. Because I knew when morning came, the trap wouldn't close on me. It would close on them. They thought they were cornering me. They didn't realize I was leading them right where I wanted them. Every greedy person eventually digs their own hole. I just made sure mine was deep enough for all of them. The next day, I picked up that pen. But the papers I signed weren't the ones they gave me. They were mine. The morning started like any other. The smell of coffee, the sound of dishes, the same silence between me and my son. But this time, I wasn't the quiet, helpless old man he thought I was. I was calm because the plan was already in motion. He came into the kitchen holding that same folder, trying to act casual, like nothing was wrong. He slid the papers toward me and said it needed to be done today. I looked at him and nodded. I picked up the folder, turned each page slowly, pretending to struggle to read. I even squinted and asked for my glasses just to make him relax. He thought I was stalling because I didn't understand. But the truth was, I understood everything, and I was enjoying every second of watching him underestimate me. I said I'd take the papers to the study so I could sign properly. He didn't care. He was too sure of himself to notice that I carried 2 folders instead of 1, his and mine. The one my lawyer and I prepared the day before. Inside mine were updated ownership papers, the new will, and the clause that cut him off completely if he ever tried to claim my property again. Everything looked the same from the outside. Same color cover, same labels, same layout. I had made sure of it. I walked to the study slowly, shut the door, and sat down. I placed both folders side by side, his papers on the left, mine on the right. I opened the one I had prepared, took a pen, and began signing where my lawyer marked. Every signature, every initial, every page locked the property deeper into my control, my house, my land, my decision. When I was done, I put my signed papers into his folder and left his untouched set sitting on the desk. From the outside, it looked no different. To anyone else, it would seem like I had signed exactly what he asked. When I came out, he was waiting. He smiled when he saw the folder in my hand. He didn't even check it. He just looked proud, as if the job was done. His wife's parents were in the living room, pretending not to watch, but keeping their eyes on me the whole time. They thought they'd won. They thought they finally took the last piece of control I had left. I placed the folder on the table and said it was finished. My son thanked me, trying to hide his excitement. I could see him looking at his wife, both of them exchanging small smiles. They didn't realize the only thing I signed that morning was their end. That night, I called my lawyer and told him the papers were done. He confirmed the new documents were filed, notarized, and recorded. The changes were official. My property was secure, and my son's name was completely removed from every document. If he ever tried to use that folder in any legal way, it would collapse instantly. The game was over before he even knew it began. The next 2 days were quiet. They acted like everything was normal. They still mocked me, still treated me like I was invisible. I didn't say a word. I went about my day, drank my coffee, read my paper, and waited. I knew what was coming next. Once people like that think they've won, they start planning their next move. They'd start cleaning, changing, preparing for their house. And when they did, that's when the real fun would begin. I walked around the house that night, looking at everything one last time. The walls, the floor, the photos of my wife. I felt peace, not pain. They thought I was signing away my future. I had actually signed away theirs. They just didn't know it yet. They wanted me gone. Soon, they'd find out what it feels like to be the one standing outside. The next morning came with fake smiles and polite tones. Everyone in that house thought they owned the world. My son walked around proudly, telling his wife's parents that everything was settled. They believed the papers they gave me were real, that my signature had handed them my home. They didn't know the only thing I gave them was a lesson they'd never forget. I stayed quiet through breakfast, stirring my coffee slowly, letting them talk. They bragged about how they'd renovate, where they'd move furniture, and how the house would look better once the old man's touch was gone. Every word made me more certain I'd done the right thing. By noon, my son came to me holding a copy of what he thought was the signed document. He said he would take it to the notary that afternoon. I nodded and told him to go ahead. I watched as he put on his jacket, smiled, and walked out the door, confident his new life was beginning. I stayed seated at the table, calm and still. The lawyer had already submitted my real documents to the county office. Every title, every clause, every right to that property was locked under my name. He could wave his papers around all he wanted. They meant nothing. A few hours later, he came back looking confused. He said the notary refused to process his paperwork, said the property record showed new ownership under a revised deed filed that same week. He didn't understand what it meant. I did. My lawyer's office had worked faster than he expected. What my son thought was victory had already turned into failure before he even left the driveway. I watched him pace across the living room, angry, whispering with his wife, both trying to figure out what happened. Her parents stayed quiet, realizing something wasn't right. I sat in my chair and turned on the TV. I didn't explain a thing. I just let them burn in their own confusion. The next morning, I woke up early, put on my coat, and drove to the lawyer's office again. He handed me a folder containing the certified ownership documents, stamped and sealed. Everything was in my name. He smiled and said, "They can't touch it now." I thanked him, drove back home, and placed that folder in my safe. Then I waited for the moment they'd realize what they had really signed. Later that day, my son asked me for the papers, for his records. I told him they were in the study. He rushed in, grabbed the folder I left there, the same one with my signature, and started reading. Within seconds, I heard silence. He looked pale. The more he read, the worse it got. Instead of transferring ownership to his name, the papers gave full control back to me, including the right to evict anyone who wasn't on the original deed. Every page had legal proof that they had no claim to anything. His wife came running, reading over his shoulder. Her face dropped too. The in-laws froze, realizing what they'd signed. I didn't say a word. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The paper they wanted became the weapon they gave me. The same document they pushed me to sign now made them powerless in the house they thought they owned. The law was on my side. Clean, legal, final. That night, they stayed quiet during dinner. No laughter, no music, just silence and the sound of plates. It was the kind of silence that comes when pride finally breaks. I sat there eating slowly, feeling no anger, no guilt, just peace. They thought I was an old fool who didn't understand what I was signing, but I had turned their trick into my shield. They had spent weeks plotting against me, and I had beaten them with a pen and a steady hand. The paper they wanted was the same one that destroyed them. The morning came quietly, but the air in the house was heavy. No one said a word during breakfast. My son sat at the table staring at his phone, scrolling through messages, probably from the bank, the lawyer, or whoever he thought could help him fix the mess. His wife didn't look up. Her parents whispered to each other, pretending to stay calm, but I could see panic sitting behind their eyes. I drank my coffee slowly, watching the sun climb through the kitchen window. They still didn't understand what was about to happen. At exactly 9 o'clock, a white van pulled up in front of the house. The sound of the tires on the gravel made everyone turn. 2 uniformed movers stepped out, followed by a county officer with a clipboard. My son jumped up, his face pale. I stayed seated. The officer knocked once, then opened the door. He asked for my name. I nodded. Then he looked at my son and said there was a court order to remove all unauthorized occupants from the property. My son's voice broke when he asked what it meant. The officer pointed to the paperwork. My paperwork. The same set of documents his own lawyer had confirmed were legitimate. The house was legally mine again, and everyone else was required to vacate. The movers didn't waste time. They began packing boxes, carrying out bags, and clearing the rooms one by one. My son tried to argue, but the officer stopped him. Every legal right had already been processed. Every appeal had already been denied. He looked at me like I was supposed to stop it, like I was supposed to save him. But I didn't move. I had saved him his whole life. I wasn't doing it again. His wife started crying. Her parents shouted that this wasn't fair. Fair. They used that word like it meant something. None of them called it unfair when they took my room, my dignity, my peace. Now that it was happening to them, they wanted sympathy. I didn't have any left to give. The living room emptied first. Boxes of clothes, furniture, and their precious television all stacked by the door. The hallway echoed with their footsteps, the same hallway where they used to laugh when they pushed me aside. My son kept pacing, muttering that he could fix it, that he just needed time. The officer didn't respond. He was just doing his job, enforcing what was already written in law. When they got to my old bedroom, the one they had given to the in-laws, I stood up. I walked slowly through the doorway, steadying myself on the wall. The movers were taking out their suitcases, the blankets, the picture frames that didn't belong there. I looked around that room one last time and remembered how small it felt when they pushed me out. It felt bigger now, empty, peaceful, mine again. By the time the sun reached the top of the sky, the house was silent again. The officer handed me the final notice, confirming that all occupants had been removed and the property was secure. My son stood outside on the driveway, surrounded by boxes. His wife was crying quietly beside him. Her parents stared at the ground, defeated. I didn't gloat. I didn't speak. I just looked at them the way they once looked at me, like they were strangers who didn't belong here. When the officer left, I closed the door slowly. For the first time in years, I felt the weight lift off my chest. The house was warm again. The walls didn't echo with disrespect. I walked back to the kitchen, poured another cup of coffee, and sat down at the same table where it all started. That morning wasn't revenge. It was justice. Plain, legal, quiet. They built their plan on lies, and I tore it down with truth. They thought I'd die a helpless old man in the hallway. Instead, they left my house as homeless guests. The days that followed were quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you finally hear your own thoughts again. The house no longer smelled like someone else's perfume or echoed with laughter that didn't belong to me. For the first time in months, I slept through the night. But outside, things were different. My son's car sat in the driveway for 3 days straight, packed with boxes, clothes, and furniture he refused to move. He kept hoping I'd open the door and let him back in. I didn't. The papers were final. He knew it, and so did I. By the end of the week, he started calling everyone he knew, old friends, co-workers, even his wife's relatives. No one wanted to help. Word had spread around town about what he did, about how he treated me. Nobody wanted to lend money to a man who kicked his own father out of his house. People avoid shame like sickness. He learned that quickly. His wife's parents went back to their small apartment in Dayton. They didn't say goodbye. They just left. His wife stayed a few more days, crying every morning on the porch. I watched her from the window. She looked lost, holding her phone, waiting for someone to tell her what to do next. My son stopped talking to her. He blamed everyone but himself, said it was her fault, my fault, the lawyer's fault. Never once did he admit that greed was what ruined him. On the 7th day, she packed her bags, called her sister, and left too. He didn't chase her. He just sat in that car like a man who'd run out of ideas. By the 2nd week, he sold the car to pay for a motel room. I heard about it from one of the neighbors. The same neighbors who used to wave at him now crossed the street when they saw him coming. He had no job, no savings, no place to stay. He'd spent everything trying to look successful. All the credit cards, the clothes, the dinners, the new furniture, all of it bought with the money that came from me. Now that I was gone from his accounts, he had nothing left. One afternoon, I got a letter from the bank addressed to him. I opened it before sending it back. It said his business account was frozen due to unpaid loans. I folded it neatly and put it aside. That same evening, I watched from the window as he came by one last time. He stood at the gate, looking at the house. He didn't yell. He didn't beg. He just looked. I could tell he wanted to come in, to apologize maybe. But apologies don't fix years of disrespect. They don't fix what greed breaks. He turned around, got into a taxi, and left. That was the last time I saw him. The next morning, the driveway was empty. The silence after that was different, cleaner, like the house could breathe again. I walked through every room slowly, touching the walls, remembering how hard I worked to build this place. 40 years of labor, sacrifice, and loyalty. And all it took was one greedy son to almost destroy it. Almost. People in town still ask if I've heard from him. I tell them no. Some say I should forgive him, that blood is blood. But they weren't there that night when I slept in the hallway like a stray. They didn't see how his wife's parents laughed while I ate cold leftovers. Forgiveness is earned, not owed. He lost his comfort. He lost his pride. He lost everything he tried to take from me. I didn't lift a hand. I didn't raise my voice. I just signed one paper, and the world corrected itself. Now, when I look out from my porch, the air feels lighter. The sun hits the same roof he tried to steal, but it's warmer now. Because peace always feels better when you've earned it back. The house is quiet now. No footsteps, no shouting, no strange voices echoing down the hall. Just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the wind brushing against the curtains. Every morning I wake up, open the blinds, and look at the yard I once thought I'd lose. The grass is green again. The garden I planted years ago is alive. It's strange how peace looks when it finally returns. Not loud, not proud, just steady. My son's name isn't on a single paper, not on the deed, not on the bank records, not even on the mailbox. Everything that used to belong to me is mine again, and this time I keep it under my own key. I sit in the same chair where I used to eat alone while they laughed at my back. Now it's my spot again. I cook what I want, watch my shows, pay my bills, and sleep when I choose. The house feels bigger, but not because it changed, because the weight is gone. For years I thought keeping peace with my son meant letting him walk over me. I thought being silent was the same as being kind. It wasn't. Silence only feeds greed. Respect dies quietly when you don't protect it. I learned that too late, but I still learned it. Sometimes the phone rings. Sometimes it's him. I don't answer anymore. There's nothing left to say. I gave him everything once: a home, an education, a start. And he gave me betrayal. People say revenge is loud, that it burns everything in sight. But mine wasn't. My revenge came with papers, ink, and patience. It came in the form of justice, not anger. The law doesn't shout. It just waits. And when it moves, it leaves no room for excuses. Neighbors stop by sometimes to check on me. They bring pie, coffee, ask if I'm lonely. I tell them I'm fine. They don't need to know that the quiet is my reward. I don't want company out of pity. I want peace, and I finally have it. I spend my evenings sitting by the window, watching cars pass by. Somewhere out there, my son is starting over. Maybe sleeping on a couch, maybe living in someone else's spare room. I don't wish him pain. I just hope he remembers. Because forgetting is how he got here. The lawyer calls once in a while too. He says everything's still in order. He laughs and tells me I outsmarted everyone. I don't laugh back. It's not something I'm proud of. It's something I had to do. A man shouldn't need to fight for respect in his own house, especially from his own blood. But life doesn't follow what's fair. It follows what's enforced. I enforced mine with a pen. At night, when the house gets too quiet, I walk through it slowly, room to room. I stop by the doorway where I once slept on the floor. The same hallway where they shoved me aside. It's clean now, empty, peaceful. I stand there for a moment, then turn off the light. The past doesn't hurt anymore. It just reminds me to never forget. Now I keep every document locked in a safe, every title, every account, every signature. Nothing leaves this house without me knowing. I may be old, but I'm not weak. Age doesn't take away wisdom. It sharpens it. I used to think family meant trust. Now I know family means nothing without respect. So yes, my son kicked me out and gave my room away, but I took it back, legally, calmly, completely. My revenge wasn't in anger. It was in control. I didn't raise my voice. I raised my pen, and that one paper he thought would end my life ended his comfort instead. Final thought. They kicked me out of my own room. So I kicked them out of my lives, with one signature, one paper, and no mercy.